Fantastic. This is Sarah Levitt with the Making Magnificence Project. And today, I couldn't be happier. Today, my guest is Brad Wilson, CEO Emeritus of Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, with whom I did an interview 5 years ago in 2016. So Brad Wilson, welcome back to the project.
It's always good to be with you. It's hard to believe it's been 5 years.
5 years. No, I was surprised. It was the summer of 2016 when we did our first. So we're doing kind of a 5-year retrospective, and lots has happened since then. And I want to get into that just in the world of leadership. But tell us first what you've been up to.
Well, I transitioned from Blue Cross January 1 of 18. So big life event, almost in the middle of the time between 16 and today, which has been wonderful. The transition has gone well. I guess one of the things that I was doing soon after we talked, I guess probably late 2016, I began to actively percolate on when and if and how that event should happen. But since then, I've been as busy as I want to be. That's my standard. I follow good advice from wise friends and counselors that I sought out as I was thinking about retiring or transitioning. I don't like to call it retirement because I'm as busy as I want to be. But
yes.
One of the pieces of advice I got was when you walk out the door, make sure that you take 4 to 6 months and have lots of space, white space that you can think and rest and decide how busy do you want to be. And I followed that. And but shortly thereafter, I've kind of filled up my calendar with the following. I've had 2 wonderful academic appointments, one at UNC Chapel Hill, which ended when COVID hit, and another at Wake Forest, where I continue to be executive in residence, and now in the 3rd year. Continued engagement in public service. So I chaired a gubernatorial commission on public education, commonly called the Leandro Commission. So that was 18 months of really good work with wonderful people, and joined the board of the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation, which was something completely new and different in an area of the state that my wife and I love, as making sure that I'm reserving time for family, and now 4 grandsons, all of whom live within 5 miles of where I'm sitting right now. And then last but not least, as you might imagine, everything from professional coaching opportunities, consulting, one-day one and dones, to annual retainer engagements, some business board work, most of which has been in the healthcare space. And that has been exciting and wonderful. It keeps me engaged, it keeps me current. And the best thing about all of these endeavors is that you meet wonderful people, you make new friends. And particularly being on a college campus, it is encouraging and inspiring to know that the world will be just fine. Thank you very much, because of these wonderful, energetic, smart young people that are now leaders and will continue to merge and be the leaders of tomorrow. So that's about as concise as I can make it. Life's pretty good.
So so is retirement busier for you, Brad?
It is, I wouldn't say it's busier. Now, on some days it can be, I go, what are you doing?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Or you have a couple of days in a row where the calendar has been really full. Well, in fact, this week was one of them, Tuesday and Wednesday. At Monday night, I was looking at Tuesday and Wednesday, and I thought, well, who did this? Well, it was me. I have no one else to blame but myself. But I will say very quickly, parenthetically, one of the great challenges is being your own administrative assistant. So I've had to develop that skill, and I've had a couple of fumbles along the way, and you're very familiar with one of them, Sarah, so I apologize again. But my batting average is pretty good in that regard. But no, I'm not busier. The intensity and the pace is different when you are engaged in something, whether it's an hour or a half a day or 2 days. The intensity level and the energy that you put into it is the same. But then 2 days later, you may not have anything on your calendar at all, or for a half a day, or you can make sure that you're getting back into as I call, walking through airports metaphorically rather than running through airports.
Your mention of kind of being on college campuses and working with leaders and kind of seeing the new crop of leaders that's coming up is a really kind of nice segue, because I love to speak to you about leadership. So in the 5 years since we've last spoken, so since 2016, obviously we've had and are having, we're still in a pandemic. So with that as context, and just the 5 years as context, what do you think has changed, if anything, about leadership in that time? And what has remained the same, Brad?
I think one of the changes, maybe it's not about the inherent qualities and attributes of leadership, but I think the last 5 years in particular has shown us the dire need that we have for effective leadership, more of it, that is and can be well done across every dimension that you can think about. One quick example that comes to mind is, as we watched what I would term as tragic and scary events of recent months. Yes, and I'm referring specifically to January 6th of this year. I have wondered, while there were lots and many voices effective raised in that particular circumstance, only as an example, there are many, 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 large and small, the tragic events of last summer that has refocused us on important issues around race. I have been surprised, actually, that there aren't more. Now, I grew up, I was in high school and then moving into college during the late 60s and early 70s. And I don't have to describe to you or the people that are maybe listening to this, all that was going on during that period of time. Where are the young people? I've had that question.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're calling into question or having conversations around the future of democracy.
Yes.
And I wonder where they are,
mm-hmm.
because they have the longest runway to experience whatever the outcome may be at this very fragile time, and I believe that it is, in our democratic experiment. So back to your question, and not to get too far off point, I think that one observation I would have is, I think this time in particular cries out for more people to step up and step out wherever they may be, in whatever role it is that they can play on whatever subject is important, whether it be climate change or how to make sure that the local youth athletic league doesn't collapse in a pandemic environment, to engage. I would quickly say that I believe the fundamentals of leadership are the fundamentals of leadership.
I want to talk to you about that. Yeah.
Notwithstanding the evolution of events and circumstances over the last 5 years, at the end of the day, I still look to and retreat to refine, of course, and refresh the fundamentals of leadership that I have always found to be effective for me. And when I'm teaching in a class, and frequently, the reason I'm there is to talk about leadership or career development or that sort of thing. I hear that from the questions that I get when I get, well, how do I fill in the blank? My constant advice to them is to spend time in perpetuity, always understanding, knowing, and being confident in the core principles of leadership that make you a unique and dynamic and effective leader. And that is your grounding and your foundation when in times of crisis and pressure, keep you stabilized and confident. And there may be things around the edges that will change. Situations will require some muscles to be flexed over and against others. But fundamentally, it's the same. I think that I'll leave you with a couple of words and then let you guide the conversation or refine what I've said through a question that you, that in times of, like we have lived in the last 5 years, it calls upon being comfortable with ambiguity. I think ambiguity is still present, is increasing in our environment in, again, many dimensions. Questions around, I'll use the word technology or the whole cyber universe that we live in, both positive and negative. I'm confident that we don't know what we don't know yet, still, if ever. And that requires a different type of leadership and wrestling with questions of almost like, how do you catch smoke or vapor? Again, metaphorically, I think that will continue. I think that as another example, when big events like a pandemic hit, what does that mean and require? And when you physically, when your physical rhythm of life cannot remain the same, it must be a different way for health, safety, and a common purpose. What do you do? And how do you deliver your leadership and be a leader when you can't be in the room, literally and metaphorically? So I'll just stop at that point and see if you think that was responsive.
Yeah, no, well, you know, I have like 10 questions. So, so I'm hearing a couple of things. One is the critical importance of kind of core principles as guides and as foundation when the ambiguity and when things are swirling around a leader. So core principles to be effective. Am I hearing that right, Brad?
Yes, absolutely. Right.
And so a couple things. What were and are your core principles that you made sure to kind of develop, and what is effective? Because we hear so much about leadership, but what is effective leadership?
Well, it begins, well, let me start with the second part of the question. What is effective leadership? I believe effective leadership is through demonstrable action. One can organize, can recognize, synthesize, organize such that those that need to be led will look to you or to a group of people to provide guidance and direction, empathy, and motivation to move from whatever the negative circumstance may be or circumstance may be to something better. It's probably not very artfully said.
No, you said a lot there.
But yeah. Of course, you know, if there aren't followers, there aren't leaders.
Yes.
And I do believe, to my core, that everyone should think of themselves as a leader. But then the question becomes, what is your role? But I think that even if you're not sitting in the chair at the head of the table,
yeah,
and there's only usually one or maybe two of those seats, and you're around the side of the table, you have no less of a responsibility to be a leader than anyone else, or the person who has the title or the ultimate accountability for the leadership of that organization or issue or topic or whatever it may be. But your role may not be as large. It may not be as multidimensional as someone else, because at the end of the day, a decision has to be made. To use a sports metaphor, a play has to be called,
right?
And then everybody has to run it in order to try to move from one place to another, whatever that might be. And so that's what I would kind of how I view and feel and observe effective leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn from effective leaders. You see them and you watch what they do and you take notes and you emulate if and in the event it fits you, which takes me to the first part of your question. You have to have, I believe, your core set of beliefs and principles that, again, you are confident in, not arrogant about, but confident in. But it's always right and appropriate and should that to hold those principles up all the time through a refreshing lens to see and to test and make sure that maybe there is a slight modification. You're changing not the core DNA, but you might change a chromosome or two. Maybe a bad example. So what are mine? I mean, I have encouraged the people that I talk with, and particularly the students that I interact with, to spend time knowing who you are, but to be able to answer questions of like, what do you believe? What is your sense of right and wrong? What calculus do you use to when confronted with a new set of facts that maybe you have not thought about before, to decide for yourself what's best or what's right or what's wrong? Because we do live in an ambiguous world. It's under constant change and evolution. And to become too hard-coded, I think, is a threat to not only your grounding, but could cause you to make call the wrong play. So that time for self-reflection and understanding of who you are and how you demonstrate that and live your life. And there are many, many ways and resources that one can tap into, and how you're raised. That's obviously one thing. I've always put a lot of emphasis on being a skilled listener. I think leaders that do more talking than listening need to change that around and do more listening than talking, because you need to understand people and give them an opportunity to influence the ultimate decision that you may have to make. Also think there's a strong quality, glaring statement of the obvious, of being able to effectively communicate both in word and orally. If people cannot understand what you're trying to say or are saying, you will suboptimize whatever that might be. All these things are hard and are constant works of self-improvement. And then I'll just close on this one, which is really never lose your authenticity or genuineness. People can know when you're faking it. It's yes. Okay to be vulnerable, because I believe that is part of authenticity and genuineness. No one is 100% happy and satisfied every moment of every day. So it's okay to be in a bad place, but it's not okay to stay there, because attitude is a choice. We've heard that many, many times. You can get up in the morning and decide whether today's going to be good or not. But those are kind of the four guardrails or Roman numerals, if we were making an outline, that have worked well for me. There's lots of A, B, C, Ds under each one of those. But that package is what has served me well. And I always encourage everyone to find what package works best for them. And it may not be the same priority, it may not be the same package, but I'm confident we'll find common denominators across that continuum.
Were there times in so you're speaking about core principles, about leaders knowing themselves, really knowing right, what is right and wrong for them. It's, all of that. Were there times during your career, Brad, when you were kind of up against a challenge where your sense of right and wrong was really confronted, where you had to wrestle with yourself in some way?
Well, of course. The reason I was hesitating, I'm not so sure that it was in the stark terms of right and wrong. And because that conveys a certain, okay, either you were on one side of the criminal law or the other, as an example.
Yeah.
But let's go with the melody here. That there may have been trying circumstances, or things didn't work out like you thought, or you made a decision and it was a disaster. All of that would be something that would be wrong when you tried to do the right thing, and or you were uncertain as to what the correct call would be.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I can think of several examples, large and small, and all of those things shape your leadership and your character and your ability. And again, there's some old adage somewhere that says it's not whether or not you get knocked down, it's whether or not you get up. That's kind of the key moment, a leadership moment across your life. And yes, by the way, you can get knocked down several times in a row.
Yep. Yes.
And you've got to get up and keep going. But in each instance, when you're at your darkest time and you think, well, maybe it's never going to get better, you always start with what you know and have inside of you. But leadership involves other people. It involves going to those that you have confidence in, and to say, I'm in a bad place.
Yes.
My day is hard and I'm a bit shaken here. What say you about that?
Yes.
And that can be your partner, your spouse, your minister, your football coach. Who are those people? And I would say very quickly that you should know who they are.
Yes.
And you should keep those relationships nurtured and sustained. And because I'm sure that you, Sarah, and many people, that's what you're doing for a whole host of folks. And then leverage that resource when you find yourself in that place, and keep working. Don't quit. The Jim Valvano speech, never give up, or the Winston Churchill speech, never give up. And ultimately, if your leadership will help you emerge from whatever space that you may be in. The last time you interviewed me, we were emerging out of a very unfortunate set of circumstances at Blue Cross, where we had a technology meltdown. It was in the media for the first couple of months of the 2016 year. All that happened simultaneously with a breast cancer diagnosis for my wife. It was a very, very hard time for me personally. But what enabled me, as well as all of us at Blue Cross and us as a family, to cope and emerge stronger and better, was the fact that we had this collective spirit and confidence and ability to leverage all of that. So in the Blue Cross circumstance, I happen to be at the tip of the spear, or the top of the pyramid, however you want to look at it. But we came out of that not because of me, I had a part in it, but because we had a wonderful 5,000 people that were hard at it. Likewise, as a family, including the courage and persistence and toughness of my wife, I'm happy to say that 5 years of now, that all is well.
Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, no, Brad Wilson, you always talk about such good stuff. I want to go in 10 different directions. So a couple of things, because I definitely want to talk about your love of history. And it's funny, you just mentioned Churchill, but in keeping those relationships nurtured, those relationships, whether, as you say, it's a football coach, someone like you and I,
Yeah, right.
as an advisor, a partner, spouse, a dear friend, what should leaders be looking for in their closest, in Churchill's, I'm reading, I told you I'm reading this book, his secret circle. So what should leaders be looking for in that, in those few people that they might go to in times of crisis?
Trust.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Which means, what does that mean?
I believe that the confidence to know that your counselor, in whatever form it takes, or the place that you go, the person that you go to, that you have absolutely no doubt that they will tell you the unadulterated truth, even if it hurts.
Yeah.
They are confident that they can do it.
Yes. Yeah.
That you are aware that that is in your best interest for them to do that. And the relationship has to be one that has 100% integrity, because without that, there can be no trust, and vice versa. I think those things are inseparable. And such that, and confidentiality, which goes back to trust.
Yes.
And so there are other attributes I'm sure that I could think of, but I think I've made the point.
Yeah.
You can't have any reservation whatsoever that by engaging with that person or persons, that you're going to get what you need.
Mm-hmm.
Not get what you want.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You're gonna get what you need. And then once that they do their job, and it may be a one and done, or it may be a series, it is your job to accept unconditionally, as they have offered unconditionally, unconditionally that which they have said. And it's your job then to turn that into something of strength, leverage, energy, confidence, whatever it might be, that will move you to a better place. I will say to you that those relationships are very few. I mean, I've had people say to me, I'm blessed that I've got, 37 people that I can go to. Well, they're very, very fortunate, and I wouldn't play judge about that. I know for me that it's less than 5.
Yes, me too. Yes.
Right. And I struggle to understand how the number can be large, but it is what it is for you. Maybe if I decided I wanted to have 10, I could have nurtured those along the way. Maybe I found that the number that I have and that is sufficient, and I didn't need any more, because too much information you can drown.
Right.
And by the way, those relationships could change over time.
Yes.
It might be that you had your college group, and then you had your law school group, and people ebb and flow.
Brad, when you talk about integrity in this relationship, give me a little bit more there. I want to make sure I'm understanding. So you talk about trust, certainly, but you said integrity is, they're kind of melded together.
Right.
What do you mean by integrity in this kind of case?
Okay, well, it means that that person would never compromise in any facet. So they wouldn't compromise the confidentiality. They wouldn't see a weakness in you and then take advantage of it.
Yep.
Somehow. I can help you out here if you'll, send me half of your bank account.
Right.
Let me hold the gold for you, literally or metaphor, whatever it might be. And that's what I mean by, and then honesty. I mean, that people will be completely honest. And now that doesn't mean that you're brutal about it, because how you say things and how you behave is sometimes more important than what you say. And so being skilled in knowing when to be maybe a little more candid with a little stronger emphasis in another. And that is a rare talent, a rare skill. It is something developed over time. And true leaders work at that, I believe. They understand the value of that, even outside of this confidentiality relationship we're talking about.
Yeah.
If you're leading, a million people, you understand that, and you work with that and at that. Again, not to be disingenuous, but to be effective.
Yes. To
That's
help.
the art of leadership.
Yes.
I think.
So in your consulting and advising and coaching of leaders right now, what are you seeing, particularly in the context of the ambiguity that the pandemic has kind of brought front and center? Is there are these waters ambiguous in a different way, the waters in which leaders find themselves now, or is the pandemic just an event that could have been something else?
No, I think, well, let me say this, whether the pandemic may have been just something else, I think we're not going to know for a while. Because in talking with lots of people over the last year, I hope we don't waste the crisis. There's so many things that we've learned, I think, about ourselves, about us collectively as a country, the way of doing things, conducting business, on and on and on, the delivery of healthcare, that it caused us to pay more attention to those kinds of things, and that we should not immediately default and say, okay, we're going to all now just go back and do everything that we were doing in November of 2019. We should take the lessons learned and pivot from it and make the glass half full.
So let me pause you there, actually. Hang on.
Okay.
So leadership lessons learned that you would hope that leaders will carry forward from this would be?
Okay, well, let me just give you a very practical example, because at the end of the day, virtual care works. It is here to stay. It should not go away. It's not. We have all learned, and I've talked to a lot of my provider friends, from their perspective, they had, even those that had already embraced it and were deploying it and had integrated it into their clinical practice, it was not as a pervasive part as it is now. And what they have said to me, it wasn't because it was just kind of something on the side that we did, and we would didn't leverage it to the degree that we could have. Why? Because we're still busy doing it the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
Now, motivated by patient need, their desire to continue to do their great work for their patients, and they have no choice but to do it virtually, that which can be done virtually.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
By the way, to maintain and sustain a revenue model.
Yes. Yeah.
Because if you're not interacting with a patient, there's not a transaction there. All of those things. Then on the patient side, well, I don't want to talk to my physician like you and I are talking. I just don't want to do it because I'd rather do it the way I've been doing it. Well, if I want to interact with my physician and I can, and I have circumstances that can, well, I've gotten used to it. Well, this works quite fine.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
And so it would be extraordinarily unfortunate that now that the adoption rate, and I've read a statistic which is now dated, it's hard to believe it's been 9 months, last June, that the delivery of mental health, behavioral health services had increased 30 through virtual care, had increased 30% in 90 days between March and June. Now, I'm sure those statistics pick your whatever can be done virtually. So we need to continue that progression, which will then drive things that we have yet to not understood. The technology will get better. Our comfort with Zoom calls.
Yes.
All of that. I mean, I was one I didn't like to do a Zoom call.
Yeah.
Well, now it's a way of life.
Yeah.
So that would be an example of where leaders need to, whatever it may be that's in their line of sight that is now different as a result of the COVID experience, that has that they recognize as leaders who can influence others to adopt and maintain and embrace and improve those new and unique things that but for COVID, we may not have recognized how deep and wide they could have been. I think it's incumbent upon those leaders to articulate that and to lead it. I think, maybe another example would be, as we all need to become even more tuned into the fact, I think climate change is the number one issue for my grandchildren. Okay, what I'm sensing as a real adoption of and understanding of the value of electric vehicles. I saw an Audi advertisement last night. I think maybe I missed it, but that's the first time I've seen them. The GM announcement. That seems to me to be a paradigm shift. Did that have anything to do with COVID? I don't know, maybe not. But it is another example of where leadership now, we need to lean into that for the sake of the planet. The list will go on and on. So the leadership point would be, it's the responsibility of leaders to identify those unusual, unknown, unattractive elements of our progress, to spotlight them and to help us understand them, embrace them, and push them and lead us to a different and hopefully better place, and to recognize the opposition to that and to point that out as well. False prophets.
So in our time that we have here, so we've been talking about kind of, future focused, and I want to turn the lens around and look backwards, because I know you're a student of history. You're an avid reader of history. So so a couple of things. What knowledge, because you've been a history buff for a long time, Brad. Yes, that's fair to say.
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely right. I was an undergraduate history major and loved history even before then. So,
So you and this has always just been something that I'm so curious about. So a couple things. What are you curious about still about history? Where are you looking to expand your knowledge or understanding? Let me start there.
Okay. Yes, history has always been my favorite subject from the time I began to read. And I think the value of history, of course, is in the anecdote that we have heard, those who do not learn from the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. I think that's absolutely true. A quick example would be the pandemic of 1919.
Yes.
Basic lessons like, if you put a whole lot of people together in one place, they're all going to get sick. So that's a really bad idea. We proved that 100 years ago and even before that. So history offers us all kinds of, history offers us a record of behavior and actions that can be taken in times of crisis that will either mitigate against the current crisis or avoid it. And I do believe that if we all understood those lessons more clearly, it would be more avoidance than mitigation, which is a good thing. If you can avoid the crisis, then there's no crisis, and that's a whole lot less expensive than dealing with it. So I encourage everyone to read as much history as they possibly can. Now, in the leadership context specifically, then you get into the biography arena where you learn lots of things, but you're learning about a particular individual and how they coped and what they did and what their life experience was. And then you can glean from that actual lessons. Attributes, traits, become a great speech maker, whatever it might be. So that's another reason to study history for the specific purpose of leadership development. And that's where I've gone a lot. So now what am I doing personally? And what maybe specifically, what are the circumstances over the last 5 years kind of triggered? Well, let me just begin by telling you, currently I'm reading a biography of Beethoven, which is unusual for me because I'm not a musician. But it has been fascinating. First of all, I've learned a lot about music. I've had to if I'm going to understand the biography. It is, quote, the official biography of the 250th anniversary, Beethoven's birth, and it's wonderful in many dimensions. So that was really I'm not sure. In fact, in preparation for this, Sarah, I was thinking about reading that biography, and I thought, now if I mention it, she's going to say, "What leadership lesson have you learned by reading the biography about Beethoven?" And I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure that I've learned that much because he was a pretty unusual fellow. Yeah. But in any event, that's what I'm reading right now. But where I'm going to pivot to, and it is about the circumstances of the last year. The next book that I'm going to read is Stamped from the Beginning. And no, I'm sorry. The next one I'm going to pick up and start, and I may do these simultaneously, is the Biography of Malcolm X, the most recent one. I read the last book I read about or by Malcolm X was his book when I was in high school. And so I'm so excited about this new biography that came out that's where I'm going to turn, and then Stamped from the Beginning. Where I want to spend some time is re-educating myself about and therefore reorienting my historical context of the issue of race and slavery, and that whole big subject, and accelerated and emphasized by the tragedies, in particular, the tragedies of last year and of recent weeks and months, and the tragedy that is inevitably going to happen at some point, God forbid. As I've thought about that a lot, and as one who grew up and was educated in North Carolina and grateful for it, but I was taught a particular flavor of that Civil War and its aftermath. And while I thought I had been pretty good about not getting into my bloodstream, I have now recognized that more of it got in there than I like. And therefore, I'm going to spend some time maybe going through dialysis to continue that really lousy metaphor. But that's what I'm going to spend some time on. And I'm going to start with those two volumes. And there's so many more. I could paralyze myself trying to figure out what to pick up first. But that's what I'm going to do.
because you have, so to your point, history was always your favorite subject. You were a history major. For leaders today, so CEO of an organization, what 2 or 3 historical figures would you say any leader of today needs to learn about?
Well, I would, he has always been on my list. Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
And he would certainly be on my list today, even if he would certainly be on my list, even if he hadn't been, because of all that I have just explained. But you think about the time through which he lived and led, it cuts across so many issues that we're still wrestling with today, from sedition to racial injustice in its most harshest terms, and everything in between. And notwithstanding the fact that that's 150 years ago, or 1860 was 150 years ago, there are lessons that are highly relevant if you will just spend time thinking about them and reading about them. So that would be one place. I would also turn to, and in particular, watching the first 90 days or 120 days, 90 days or so of the Biden administration. If you've got time to read the volumes that Robert Caro did of Lyndon Johnson. The reason is there's also racial lessons through all of that, because here's a Southern president whose congressional record was not exactly progressive, and then he was unable to enact what was enacted that we all know about, that really reset the table and helped pivot and set the country on a different trajectory, albeit too slow, but it is what it is. But it's also about getting things done.
Yeah.
How do you take the complex machinery of democracy and actually get legislation through and get something done? And the bill that was signed yesterday is an example of getting something done. I think that, and I'm looking for right now, and I've got lots of choices, a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that I was inspired to do that is there's a wonderful podcast that I recommend to everybody on the airwaves here. It Was Said. John Meacham is the narrator. And one of his segments was on Eleanor Roosevelt. That whole series is about leadership. It's about history. It's about biography. It is about the art and the skill and the power of the spoken word. But recognizing her role with her husband and her partner and what she was able to accomplish. Yes, because she happened to be his partner, but because she was who she was, separate and apart from him, is something that I need to understand and learn more about. And I think her life experience and leadership is relevant today because she was a strong and early voice, not only for women, but for the African-American community of the United States and beyond, and was seen that way. So anyway, that, there's so much. My biggest challenge is every time the New York Times Book Review, which I listen to every Friday. Now I'm 2 weeks behind. I got to read that. I got to read that. I got to read that. Or my friends like you are sending me, you've got to read this.
Oh yeah, no, I have more books going right now than I've ever had, and it's not good actually because I'm bouncing around between books. But because you are such a student of history, I wanted to make sure that I asked what, historical figures, leaders today could be looking to. And so,
and again, sir, I want to say very quickly, those kind of fit my nature.
Yeah.
It's hard to make a mistake, and I would just encourage everyone to find the places that resonate and the figures that resonate with them, and the style of writing, whatever. Anything John Meacham writes, I know I can read. Someone else maybe not, but don't give up. Go find those, because it's there. Yeah. And you will find something that will expand your mind and lift your and inspire your heart. Yeah, I'm confident that you will.
Yeah, Brad, is it true? I should probably ask you. I'm thinking I read somewhere when you were talking earlier about at the beginning of our conversation about leaders being effective communicators in both writing and word. You were just mentioning Abraham Lincoln. Do I remember something about how he had a speechwriter that spent like 2 hours on what was going to be the Gettysburg Address, and Lincoln dashed off the Gettysburg Address in, I don't know, like on a train ride, something like really.
Right.
Do I have that even close?
I'm not so sure. I don't know about the speechwriter. For some reason, that's resonating with me that maybe that's the case. But the latter point for sure, that he did it in a very short period of time, and and what a wonderful. The point is, you can say a lot in a little bit of time, but it's hard. He's given credit for the phrase that I know that we've discussed before, that he's writing a letter to a friend, and he opens it by saying, "I apologize for writing you a long letter because I don't have time to write you a short one." Yes. Now, there's a leadership lesson there, that when you have the opportunity to communicate and you recognize in particular that it is a leadership moment, although I think every time you act, you have that opportunity, but those that you, for sure, now this is a special time, that one should spend time to craft a message that is rich and powerful and short. And the richer it is, the shorter it will be. And actually, and it's hard. Trust me, it's hard. I've written a lot of speeches for myself. I have had wonderful support as well, and then edited, et cetera, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of work. But those where you spend a lot of time and a lot of work, the reviews are going to be, they will, it will be remembered for the purpose that you intend it to be. So that's, and if you are in a position where you're fortunate to have resources or speech writers, of course, they're great. But don't just take and then open it up and start. It needs to be, you need to make sure that it's authentic and genuine. And defaulting, unless you have to, because you didn't have time or whatever, it needs to be your voice. And you can make it your voice, even if someone has been extraordinarily helpful to you by giving you a framework or facts and figures or data, or this is the two themes that we really want to try to get across today, because it's a business context or whatever other kind of context it may be. If it's not something that you yourself are crafting the agenda for the day.
And to your point, that goes back to the authenticity of the leader, which yeah,
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
And practice. I mean, one thing that, again, I was fortunate enough to do throughout my entire, I mean, even from high school, practicing making a speech and watching those who do it well.
Yes.
Again, it was said is a great place to go and listen to how people put words together and why they put them together that way.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
borrow from it.
Yeah.
But good old fashioned standing up and looking yourself in the mirror. By the way, I would urge, if you again have these resources, that when you're making speeches, long or short, ask your colleagues to tape it for you and show it to you.
Yes, yes,
and get that criticism.
Yes.
All of that over and over and do it forever. Because you never get to the place and say, okay, got it.
So we are just at time, but I have two. Do you have a couple more minutes? I want to ask you just two questions. So you just said something that caught my attention, which is you kind of never, I'm interpreting it, translating it as you, as a leader, you never stop growing and developing. Right. Is that, yeah.
Correct.
And so what would you say to leaders to CEOs, as you know, CEOs of organizations who are crunched for every minute of every day, oftentimes, what are the best ways for them to continue to develop?
Well, you've got to have the discipline. And again, I know it's hard, been there.
Right, yeah.
You've got to preserve and reserve sufficient time for you to do what you just said.
Yep. Yep.
There's no way around it. And that goes from making sure that you are keeping yourself in good physical and mental health. If you have to put on your appointment book your run or your time in the gym or your time for yoga, whatever it is, then I would urge you to put it on there as an appointment, and it is as important as everything else. Now, things happen. You might have to, you'll make the right judgment. That's why you have the job that you have. But start there. Yeah. And then understand really what we've been talking about here today, that leadership is a lifelong journey. You never reach the end. There's always opportunity to learn and improve. And whatever your rhythm of life is and whatever you require, to find time for your self-improvement and encouragement, that is the best investment that you can make for your organization and those that depend on you for their livelihood.
Yes, yes.
If you make the wrong decision or suboptimize a decision, it could translate and calculate into people losing their jobs. You may not lose yours.
Yes. Yeah.
And so never forget the responsibility and the dependency that people are giving to you, and the delegating their confidence and their willingness to accede to your judgment. So investing in yourself to try to optimize all of your capabilities and to keep them fresh and current is not taking away, stealing time from the company or the organization or sloughing off. And that can include, oh, by the way, taking a vacation.
Yes.
And sitting quietly and doing nothing.
Yes.
It's really hard. And I would just encourage you to, again, develop the discipline. If you're new into a role or you're thinking about interviewing for a job that will be all-consuming, I would urge you to have that as an active part of the recruitment conversation, or the terms and conditions, if you will, too legalistic. But to say, this is what I think is valuable for the organization. And this is what I think is the best approach for the organization, and I'm part of it. And
Yep.
this is how I'm going to, and I'll guarantee you that an enlightened board, and one that you'll want to work for,
Yes.
will immediately
yes.
recognize the value of that and will encourage you to do it, or maybe even force you to do it.
Oh, there's such wisdom there. And I love the line you draw between a leader investing in optimizing their own capabilities and the outcomes for the organization, for sure.
Mhm.
And the responsibility a leader bears for all of those people. Last question that I ask every interviewee, which I asked you 5 years ago, but I'm going to ask it again, is the best advice you never got.
The best advice that I never got. What did I say 5 years ago? That.
That.
Yes, that's right. The best advice.
You might have a different perspective now. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I know you wouldn't let me cheat. The best advice that I never got. Well, I've got lots of choices running through my head, but I'm going to pick one that's kind of top of mind, actually out of a conversation that I had with some students not long ago. I never got the advice as I was putting my academic career together to tool myself to go to law school, which I knew that I wanted to do. But I never had any intentions of doing what I ultimately did the last 22 years. I did practice law, and I enjoyed my government service work, but I never intended to go into business as I ultimately did. In fact, during my educational career, I would kind of run away from the business school or the business department. So I never got the advice to do that, to actually spend time over there. But that's not your question, because if I'd gotten that advice, I would have ignored it. I'm confident that I would have ignored it.
No, wait, and what is that? I want to make sure I'm capturing it.
To not be. So we've talked a lot about me loving history and et cetera. Okay,
yeah.
So yes, that's true. I'll make my point this way. That's true. And so I had 2 minors, philosophy and religion and political science. Okay, think about that. That's a pretty homogenous world.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I intentionally stayed out of the business school. I'll just make it simple for the purposes of communication. But not recognizing that there might be some value over there.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if I had gotten the advice to do that, I probably would have ignored
it. Yes.
But I never did. So that's the best advice. That's not good advice. I didn't get it. But what I wished I would have gotten was advice to diversify my learning, to expand my curiosity, the boundaries of my curiosity. I never got that. I didn't get that advice. I wished I had, and had I gotten it, it would have been great advice. And the question would have been, would I have ignored it? So now what I tell students, Sarah, is what you should, when they say, well, how does somebody like you get to where you, and one of the things I say to them is become Renaissance people. Be curious about everything. Sit and decide about 2 or 3 subjects or topics or disciplines that you actually aren't particularly good at, and or therefore you probably don't like them as well, or maybe you just don't like them and you don't know whether you're good at them or not.
Yeah.
And be intentional about learning more about those 2 or 3 things that you would write down. And it is so easy for them to do that now without the consequence of an A, B, C, D, E, or F. You can go online
Yes.
and go to school on virtually anything and learned a lot about it. And there's not that ultimate, there's more ways to learn, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You know, and beyond going to the library and pulling off a book and trying to figure out what it's saying to you, beyond that, so I'll just leave people with that thought. Be a Renaissance person. It will cause you to be multidisciplinary. You'll be prepared to do whatever may come your way, or better prepared to do what may come your way. And it will certainly enhance your leadership in whatever role it is that you may be. Yeah,
expand the boundaries of your curiosity. That's a fantastic, that's great. Brad Wilson, thank you. It has, as always, been a pleasure to have you at the Making Magnificence Project. So thank you for this conversation.
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity, Sarah. It's always good to be with you. And I look forward to learning what you're reading again soon. So.
Thank you.